When I started getting very interested in the Arab-Israeli conflict, one of the thing, and this is the other turning point, I guess, I found. I should make clear, I'm not the first one to find this. It's not an original discovery of mine. I mean, I went into the library and started looking up stuff on the history of the Arab-Palestinian conflict. And I discovered that all of this was already documented. It was all in the library. The Arab-Palestinian movement was created by the same people who carried out the Nazi extermination of the European Jews during World War II. The founding father of the Arab-Palestinian movement is this guy called Haj Amin al-Husseini, who was very, very extremely famous, world famous, in the first half of the 20th century, and even still immediately after the war, certainly very famous. But now in the West, and in the West, he was famous in the West as well as the Muslim world. But now, after World War II, a few years after World War II, the media stopped talking about him. They just dropped the subject of Husseini completely. And after a few decades in the West, nobody could remember him because that's how I found this is how cultural memory works in the modern world. So if the media stops talking about something, it's almost as if they had erased it. They don't need to censor anything. They don't need to go into the libraries and remove anything. They just stop mentioning it, and it disappears from the consciousness of millions of people. But this guy Husseini, who is now largely forgotten by Westerners, was as important as Adolf Hitler. That's the kind of person we're talking about. Yeah, it was very important. He founded the Palestinian movement in the 1919, something like that, and he was responsible for big terrorist attacks against the Jews living in British Mandate Palestine. And that history is interesting, but I'm going to skip it. But there were huge terrorist attacks organized by him, and he became the Great Mufti of Jerusalem. He was made Great Mufti of Jerusalem by the British government, the colonial British government that was controlling the British Mandate Palestine. And from that position, he organized these terrorist attacks. And then the biggest one was called the Arab Revolt. It went from 1936 to 1939. It ended with the outbreak of World War II. Husseini had created such tremendous chaos and violence in British Mandate Palestine that the British finally intervened. So he left. He went to Iraq. In Iraq, he was. You have to understand, this guy had enormous prestige all over the Muslim world. He was an internationally known figure, very respected among many Muslim leaders for his attacks against the Jews in Mandate Palestine. And when he went to Iraq, he was treated as if he were some kind of official leader of Muslims, something like that. So they gave him, a budget. He became almost like a cabinet minister, and he started ordering people about and organized the Farhud, which is a gigantic pogrom of the Jews of Baghdad that pretty much ended Jewish life in Baghdad. Edwin Black, a very important historian, has a very good book on this event. And after doing that, Husseini went on to Italy, where Mussolini received him as if he were a head of state. The fascists were very interested in Husseini and in making an alliance with Husseini, because they were making important alliances with all kinds of rulers and leaders in the Muslim world. The Nazis had an extensive system of diplomacy and alliance with Muslim leaders. And so Husseini was very interesting to them because Husseini was so famous and had such high prestige all over the Muslim world that many people thought he was going to be the next caliph. Okay, so they received, when Husseini arrived in Rome, Mussolini received him like a head of state, and with all the pomp and circumstance. And then Husseini went on to Berlin, where he was again received like a head of state. Hitler himself came out to receive him with all the dignitaries and the cameras flashing and the film rolling. They treated it as a tremendous event, and Hitler sat down to talk to him for a while. They came to some very important agreements. Your viewers can go see this. It's all over the internet. They can go to my YouTube channel, The Management of Reality, and see the footage of Husseini meeting Hitler. Because we have a short documentary on the history of Husseini and everything else. So they can see it there now. And they agreed, Husseini and Hitler, that they would exterminate the Israeli, they weren't Israelis yet, the Jews living in British Mandate Palestine. They would ethnically cleanse the Middle East of Jews. That was their agreement. They would collaborate together to do that. Now, they couldn't do that because the Nazis were stopped at El Alamein in Egypt. So the Nazis never got to Jerusalem. But the consolation prize for Husseini was that he stayed in the orbit in the Nazi-occupied Europe for the rest of the war. He was very important to the Nazis. They gave him an entire bureaucracy. It was called Bureau des Gros Mufti. They gave him a budget, and he started doing all kinds of things. He was very prominent in Nazi propaganda, inciting Muslims to kill Jews. Muslims allied with the Nazis, for example, in Bosnia and Kosovo. He organized entire divisions of Heinrich Himmler's SS that participated in the Yugoslav chapter of the Holocaust, killing Serbs, Jews, and Roma, the people we often call gypsies. And that was already bad enough. I mean, so he was, that marks him off as a leader of the Holocaust, as an organizer of the Holocaust. But it gets worse because after the war, the Nuremberg War Crimes Tribunal was doing all kinds of investigations, and one of those investigations, a very important one, concerned the interrogation of Dieter Wisliczeny, or Wisliczeny, I never know exactly how to pronounce it. He was a Czechoslovak who was a right-hand man to Adolf Eichmann. Now, Adolf Eichmann is the recognized director of the death camp system, of the Final Solution, and according to him, he was executed by the Nuremberg Tribunal proceedings. But before he was executed for his war crimes and crimes against humanity, Wisliczeny testified to a bunch of things because he was interviewed very extensively by the prosecutors. And they considered him a very good witness in the sense that he was very meticulous in giving them all kinds of detailed answers to their questions. And he corrected many things that they thought that were mistaken, and they were able to corroborate his corrections and so forth. So this is a very careful witness, somebody who was executed because he was an evil bastard, but who in the last minute of his life decided to be a good witness, and he was a good witness. And what he said about al-Husseini was that Husseini had become, immediately after arriving in Berlin, Husseini arrived in Berlin in late October 1941, and he said that Husseini was the one who had convinced them to switch from a policy of expulsion to a policy of complete extermination. Wow. Okay, so that's one thing Wisliczeny said. He said, and historians agree that up until the autumn of 1941, which is when Husseini arrived in Berlin, Up until then, although the Nazis were killing many, many Jews, this is true. They had already begun killing many Jews, but they still had a policy of expelling most Jews from the Nazi-occupied area. And they had not yet decided to kill all Jews. That decision was taken in the Wannsee Conference, which is January of 1942, which is after Husseini had already been among them for several months. And according to Wislicenyi, he's the one who convinced them that they had to kill them all, according to Husseini, because they couldn't go to his Palestine. You see, he couldn't contemplate the Jews coming to Palestine, and the Nazis ended up agreeing with him that they should all be killed. So according to Wislicenyi, this is what Husseini did, and also he became Eichmann's best friend, and together with Eichmann, according to Wislicenyi, Husseini and Eichmann together organized and directed the entire death camp system. So the father of the Palestinian movement is also the man responsible, with Eichmann and Hitler and Himmler, of murdering the European Jewish population.
Whoa.
So that was a big turning point for me, because when I found all of this out, I said to myself, well, something is funny with the world, because why is this guy unknown? You know, we know about Hitler, we know about Himmler, we know about Eichmann. How come we don't know about this guy? And so I started looking at it, and I realized that there had been radio silence about this guy for decades. Nobody had mentioned him. So I thought, well, I should mention him, because somebody should, because the most important intervention in the world of Haj Amin al-Husseini in the post-war, because he didn't escape. They allowed him to escape. They had him in house arrest in the outskirts of Paris at the end of the war. There were parliamentarians in the House of Commons screaming that Husseini had to be tried for war crimes and crimes against humanity, and why wasn't he being tried at the Nuremberg Tribunal? What's going on? You know, they were very upset. He was very famous. They were very upset that no trial had begun. But they had him in house arrest, and of course he just walked out, went to some Arab embassy. They gave him a passport, and he just left. He went to Cairo, where Gamal Abdel Nasser, the Egyptian dictator, protected him. Nasser had been allying, like many other Muslim leaders, with the Nazis. So he protected Husseini in Cairo. And in Cairo, in the 1950s, with the help of several Nazi refugees, German Nazi refugees that arrived there to also get protection from Nasser, Husseini used some of these people, apparently, to train Yasser Arafat, Mahmoud Abbas, and a few other adolescents in the 1950s. And this is what became Al-Fatah. So Al-Fatah is a creation of Husseini's Arab Higher Committee. That was his organization. And Al-Fatah, as your viewers may not know, is the governing core of what we now call the Palestinian Authority. So Al-Fatah, Nasser had created a group called the PLO, the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is a terrorist group. In 1964 is when it was created. But by 1970, Al-Fatah had swallowed the PLO. So the PLO became basically Al-Fatah, although it had other terrorist groups also as appendages. But let's say the governing core, the most important group in the PLO from 1970 onwards is Al-Fatah. So I always say PLO Fatah to make that clear. And PLO Fatah became a very important, the most important terrorist group, killing Jews and Israeli Jews and also people from other countries as part of its campaign against the state of Israel. And, well, obviously, being a creation of Husseini, PLO Fatah has the clear mission of finishing the job that Husseini left unfinished, because he could never get to Jerusalem. That was the big lament of his life, was that there were so many Jews still left to kill in the Middle East that he hadn't been able to reach. So Arafat and Abbas were supposed to continue that holy mission of jihad, that because PLO Fatah has been represented as a secular group, but you should know that Husseini was all about jihad. It was an entirely religious thing for him. He was the Mufti of Jerusalem, right? And he's the creator of PLO Fatah. So this story we've been hearing about the supposedly secular PLO Fatah is, in my opinion, a crock. It's just not true at all. Just to finish, sorry, I know you're taking air. I've been speaking for a long time. I'm almost done. So PLO Fatah pretended in the run-up to the Oslo Accords to have seen the light and started saying that they wanted peace now in exchange for a piece of territory, blah blah blah, and that's the representation, the narrative that was used to promote the diplomacy that got PLO Fatah inside the Jewish state. So when I saw all this, I said to myself, so the Jewish state was created after World War II to protect Jews from Nazi exterminations. And here we have the organization created by the Nazi exterminator of the European Jews being introduced into the Jewish state to be the government over the Arabs in strategic territory, because it's high ground. Judea and Samaria is high ground, what they call the West Bank. So I thought, well, this is an attack on Israel, obviously. What else could it be? How can it make any sense to introduce into strategic territory of the state created to protect the Jews from extermination, to put there, to rule over the Arabs, the organization created by the guy who killed the European Jews? Nothing could be a bigger aberration. So I thought, well, somebody has to say this, because all of this information is crucial to understanding what the Arab-Israeli conflict really is. So I published this. First I published it in Emperor's Clothes, and that was read by people at Israel National News, Arutz Sheva, the religious Zionists in Israel. So they asked me to republish, and the consequence of getting that piece published in Israel National News was that I was fired from the University of Pennsylvania, and that was a big shock to my system. It made me realize that I didn't understand the system I was in.
There's so many